future where mankind has resolved to abandon war and replace it with virtual battles, teams of 9 elite fighters selected by the nations face each other in pairs to win a precious new energy that promises to bring the world back from the ashes. You have the opportunity to lead one of these teams out onto the 3x3 grid, where you take turns with your opponent and carefully occupy key positions, in the hope that you win battle after battle to become a hero of the Vector Wars. The backstory of the game reminds me a bit of Tron mixed in with Speedball, which was one of my favourite games in the good old days of home computers. Yet overall, Vector Wars feels much more like chess, be it a game of chess on steroids, and with some elements of Stratego. There are a lot of great mechanisms that make gameplay so interesting, so Elie Maman has done a really good job. Let me give you some examples. As you play characters into the grid, you need to decide where to place them. You're quickly reminded of tic-tac-toe, so you might think that occupying the center space is of benefit. However, being in the center also means you're more likely to have to fight more opponents, so you better choose a character that has good stats, and that's the next decision you have to think about. Each character has 4 stats, 1 for each edge. So you might find that a character is very strong on one edge, say the top edge, not so strong on the others, so you decide to play them near the bottom of the grid, meaning that they can't be attacked from behind by your opponent. In fact, you might want to put them into the corner of the grid, meaning they get even more protection, especially on 2 sides. You play each character face down, but you always have the option as a free action to flip the character's face up. That might be fine if your character is powerful on all edges. You might want to keep your stats secret as long as possible if your character hasn't. Yet if you do that, and if you play a character in a corner, then your opponent might guess what you're up to. And it's this that creates a very interesting interplay between players. You don't want to give too much information away, yet you also want to dominate the board. There are also ways of buffing up your character strength. You can create fortifications on one side or increase the character's overall power. In both cases, you roll a die, which introduces an element of chance. I know people don't like chance in strategy games, but I think in Vector Wars it works because it adds enough uncertainty that creates an element of suspense to spice things up a little. You can also buy special weapons or other powers from a center market row, which again adds some more randomness because you can't predict what cards may come out next. But you can of course control when you want to buy cards, or if you want to flush the whole row and get a new selection. Again, this works really well and is a mechanism you will have seen in other card games. The game is also set up differently each time, dictated by a card you draw from a setup deck. It means that money and other bonuses appear in different places each time, meaning you have to adjust your strategy accordingly. Mind you, the game is less about strategy but much more about tactics. There are 4 different factions in the game, where the team's characters have different abilities, so you want to follow a certain overall strategy. But after your opponent's turn, the game instead will have changed enough to help you reconsider what to do next. Thank you very much for listening to this Tabletop Games blog review podcast. If you want to find out more about Vector Wars, please check out the links in the description of this podcast episode. Also check out the links to my Tabletop Games blog, my YouTube, Twitter pages, Ko-fi and Patreon, everything else that you can think of. But other than that, thanks very much for listening, and I hope you join me again soon.